for having me.
I'm so honored and grateful to God to have you on this Instagram Live. This is my first Instagram Live. I think it might be the same for you, or
Yeah, I've done TikTok lives, but I've never done an Instagram live, so this is my first time as
okay,
well.
yeah. So, just a brief introduction about who Michael is. So, his full name is Michael Jones, and he's the CEO of Inspiring Philosophy Ministries. And he has a master's in philosophy, and is working to build the apologetic video library on his YouTube channel, which is also named as Inspiring Philosophy. So, great to have you here. First question is, it's a huge one. It says that is Christmas pagan? Like, what are the arguments on both the sides, and what are your views? Should Christians celebrate Christmas or not?
Yeah, so is Christmas pagan? The short answer is no. What are the arguments people use to try to argue Christmas is pagan? Well, they'll say things like, well, Christmas trees are not in the Bible, mistletoe is not in the Bible,
Mm,
December 25th is not in the Bible. Where do these things come from? Well,
mm,
maybe they came from pagans. As Christianity spread out around the world, maybe they brought in their own traditions and then they were just Christianized. It sounds plausible on the surface. The problem is there is just no evidence for it. There is no evidence whatsoever that any of the common Christmas traditions go back to paganism. So let's talk about the date of December 25th. Why did Christians pick that date? Well, uh, from what we can tell from what early Christians were doing is that they were trying to figure out the day Jesus was born. The Bible doesn't mention it, so they try to calculate it. They also had a belief that a prophet would die on the same day that he was conceived. And they believe Jesus died on March 25th. So just count forward 9 months, you
mm.
get December 25th. That's why Christians pick December 25th. Uh, there is no evidence, as far as we can tell, of a pagan holiday on December 25th in pre-Christian times. There's a lot of myths on the internet you will see of people saying, yes, the pagans celebrated the winter solstice and the Christians took it over. There's no evidence for that. The Julio-Claudian fasti inscriptions, this was the calendar of Rome, does not mention any holiday on December 25th. We don't have any holiday connected with Aurelian, the sun emperor. They worship the sun. The only time we ever see a festival on December 25th is in the Philocalian calendar, which dates to 354 AD. That is post-Emperor Constantine. And it says there is a holiday on it called Sol Invictus. Okay. Now, it's very possible, as a lot of scholars argue, that after Constantine came into power, Christians started getting more power, pagans moved a holiday to December 25th to compete with the Christian holiday that was already on that date. So pagans put a holiday on that date to compete with Christmas, not the other way around. Some will try to bring up the Norse holiday of Yule, but we know that the king Hakon the Good of Norway, about 1,000 years ago, put Yule on December 25th to coincide with Christmas. So there's no evidence that Christians picked December 25th because of paganism. What they did was they calculated their dates. They picked December 25th because they actually thought Jesus was born that day. Pagans then started putting holidays on that day to compete is a more likely explanation in my view. What about holiday traditions like the Christmas tree? The Christmas tree is not a pagan idol or a pagan ritual at all. It only dates to Europe in the 1500s in a place called Alsace, France, is the first mention of a Christmas tree. Most scholars think it comes from Christian plays. In Europe at this time, they would do Christian plays throughout the year. On December 24th annually, they would do an Adam and Eve play because that was their feast day. That was the saint day of Adam and Eve. Okay? And they would perform a play, an Adam and Eve play. And they would use a paradise tree. Well, in Europe, in the winter, there's not a lot of trees that are green, except for evergreen or fir trees. So they would get an evergreen tree decorated with apples to use in the Adam and Eve play. And that's what's called a paradise tree. That's likely where the Christmas tree came from. It came from Christian plays, not from paganism. There's no evidence of any major Christmas custom that goes back to paganism. Santa Claus is just St. Nicholas, not a pagan deity. Mistletoe did not start getting used till the Middle Ages. Yule logs don't go back to paganism either. They go back to an English folk custom in the 1600s. So in reality, there is no evidence that Christmas goes back to paganism when you study the history of it. It's just a modern myth that people promote today, even though there's really no evidence to support it.
So in conclusion, Christmas is not pagan, right? As you said.
There is not a scrap of there is not a scrap of evidence Christmas is pagan, and scholars that will back me up on this: Stephen Hymans, Thomas Taylor, Thomas Schmidt, Peter Nothaft, as well as Peter Gainsford, Spencer McDaniel, uh, Ronald Hutton as well. And if you want to check out an atheist who has made these arguments as well, a guy named Tim O'Neill runs a site called History for Atheists, and he's got articles as well showing that Christmas is
Oh,
not
that's
pagan.
news to me. I didn't know that someone like this would have done that. Okay, so can you refer any one or two particular books which all of us can read?
Yeah, check out a book called The Stations of the Sun by Ronald Hutton. What Ronald Hutton was doing is he's actually describes himself as like an agnostic, druid, pagan type person. And he was tasked with trying to see if there was any remnants of paganism in European customs and traditions. Now, he found a little maybe here and there, but he goes through all the Christian holidays: Christmas, Easter, Valentine's Day,
Mm.
Halloween, all of these. He shows there is just not a lot of good evidence for any paganism with regards to these holidays, especially the
Mm.
first chapter is on Christmas. In about 10 pages, he debunks the whole myth that Christmas came from paganism. Another good book is by Thomas Taylor called The Origins of a Liturgical Year. He goes through this in the whole book very in depth and shows where Christmas comes from, why Christians selected it, the date of December
Okay,
25th, that is. And so those two books, Ronald Hutton, Stations of the Sun, Thomas Taylor, The Origins
okay.
of the Liturgical Year.
So based on this, we can say that Christians should celebrate Christmas, right?
I would say this: it is perfectly permissible to celebrate Christmas. It's perfectly honorable to God to celebrate Christmas. It's not required to celebrate Christmas. I would say that, so if you don't want to celebrate Christmas, fine. There's nothing in the Bible which requires you to celebrate Christmas, but you can celebrate Christmas if you want. There's
Mm.
nothing wrong with it.
Yeah. Now, what about the date 25th? I know you
Mhm.
mentioned a little bit about that, but can you explain why, if Jesus was not born on 25th of December, why do we celebrate Christmas on that particular date?
Yeah, we don't know
Yeah.
the day Jesus was born. And I'll tell you why. Because if you go back 2,000 years ago, they didn't have calendars or clocks. Peasants that lived in Galilee, in Judea, would not have known very well the time people were born. They would have known, like, you were probably born in spring or summer, but
Mm.
they're not going to know the exact day because that's just, they didn't have exact calendars that they could use that were available. Only the royal people, only the royals, the high officials would have known the exact day of the year, but the average person at the time would not. So, quite honestly, Joseph and Mary probably didn't know the exact day Jesus was born. They probably just knew the season, but it wasn't a big deal. So we don't know when Jesus was born. He could have been born on December 25th, could have been born in September. Some people say August, some say May, some say November. We don't know. It's not a big deal. But the reason why, again, the Christians picked December 25th is because they had a belief in the early church, probably inaccurate, but they had this belief that a prophet should die on the same day he was conceived. They thought Jesus died on March 25th. So just count forward 9 months, you get December 25th. Because again, if he's going to die on March 25th, then he had to be conceived on that day according to their beliefs. Just count forward 9 months. That's where the day of December 25th came from. And the reason why we still keep it today is because it's tradition now. Why are we going to change something that's been around
Mm.
for almost 2,000 years
That
now?
makes sense. Now, so many people oftentimes refer Christmas to as Xmas. Now, do you think we should do that, or
Mm-hmm.
should we just keep it, say it Christmas, or should we use Xmas as well?
So Xmas is not an English abbreviation, it's a Greek abbreviation. X is a Greek letter. It would be chi. You would write it in English
Okay.
as chi. Now, if you're going to write the word Christ in Greek, it's Christos, and the
X.
first letter would
Mm.
be that X looking letter. So Xmas just means it's a abbreviated Christmas. That's all it means. It does not mean Xmas. It means abbreviated C miss kind of basically thing. So it just
Okay.
refers to
So there's
Christ.
no harm in using Xmas.
No harm in using
Okay.
Xmas.
Who were these wise men? Like, were they kings? Were they spiritual men? Were they astrologers? And what's the deal about the number three? Like, why do we keep referring to them as three wise men?
So yeah, that's a good question. We don't know too much about them. There are different theories. Some say they were Zoroastrian, uh, basically magi. The most likely explanation I found is they were a group called the Nabateans that lived close by to Judea, and they were also followers of the Jewish
Okay.
scriptures. So Nabateans. So it's very likely that that's who they were in terms of their ethnicity. They were from that group, but we're not entirely sure. Some think they may have been members of the lost 10 tribes of Israel that, during the Assyrians, when they conquered the northern kingdom of Israel, a lot of the Israelites spread out. Maybe they were a group from there. We don't entirely know for sure who they are. Were they kings? Probably not. They were wise men. They studied the stars. They would have been very much sort of like into that. Were there three of them? Well, the Bible never says they were three of them. The Bible
Mm.
says they brought three gifts. And so we think, oh, three gifts, three wise men. But there could have been 20. They're just bringing three gifts.
Yeah.
We don't know the exact number because it just says these magi from the east brought gifts to Jesus. And they brought three gifts. So we just tend to depict them, one each holding a gift. But we don't really know the exact number. But yeah, so most likely Nabateans, in my view, or members of Israelites that were, in exile still, maybe in Babylon or elsewhere. We don't know if there were three, but we know they
Okay.
brought three gifts.
That's great. Okay, so next question is, what is the biblical relevance for Christmas tree? It's like so many people have said that we should not have or decorate trees inside our home, and especially in regard to one of the verses in Jeremiah, they claim that the Bible
Mm.
prohibits us from bringing the Christmas tree, decorating it into our homes. So, what is your view? How shall we answer them?
Okay. The Bible does not forbid Christmas trees. I'm just going to read Jeremiah 10, which people often use to try to say that you can't have a Christmas tree. So it says, learn not the ways of the nation, nor be dismayed at the signs of the heavens, because the nations are dismayed at them. For the custom of the peoples are vanity. A tree from the forest is cut down and worked with an axe by the hands of a craftsman. They decorate it with silver and gold. They fasten it with hammer and nails so that it cannot move. Now, most people stop there, and they don't keep reading past that part. Because if you keep going on, it says, they are like scarecrows in a cucumber field. They cannot speak. They have to be carried, for they cannot walk. Do not be afraid of them, for they cannot do evil, neither it is them to do. Now, if you study this, and every scholar who's ever written on Jeremiah 10 will tell you, this is about a craftsman who cuts down a tree, takes the wood, and carves an idol out of it, out of wood. This is why it says they are like scarecrows, because idols kind of look like scarecrows. They cannot walk. They have to be carried. Idols had to be carried. They cannot speak, even though they have a mouth. This is not about decorating Christmas trees. There were no Christmas
Mm.
trees in the ancient Near East. There were idols. So they would cut down wood, and then a craftsman would work it to carve it into like a human-like form or an idol form. Then they would cover the idol with silver and gold, and then they would worship the idol. There is not a scholar alive who thinks this is about Christmas trees or decorating trees. It's not. And if you want to get evidence, if you want to see a verse that supports, I wouldn't say it's about Christmas trees either, but if you want to see a verse that supports the use that we could that pine trees are okay, go to Isaiah 41, 19 and 20. I will put in the wilderness the cedar, the acacia, the myrtle, and the olive. I will set in the desert the cypress, the plane, and the
Mm.
pine together, that they may see and know and may consider and understand together that the hand of the Lord has done this. The Holy One of Israel has created it.
Mm.
So right there, God says the pine tree, along with other trees,
Mm.
are a symbol of who he is. So if you want biblical relevance, you could say the Christmas tree is just a symbol for the God of Israel because of Isaiah 41, 19 to 20. Now, again, the actual Christmas tree doesn't show up until the 1500s in Europe. And it likely came, again, from Adam and Eve
Mm.
plays paradise trees. And I actually like that connection. Let me explain you why. Because Adam and Eve brought sin into the world. When Christ was born, he came to defeat sin. So the tree, in my view, represents Jesus, who has defeated the tree and has brought us back into Eden with God. So that's why I like the Christmas tree, because it reminds me of that. The actual origin of the Christmas tree is Adam and Eve plays, where the fall happened. Christ is the mediator who brought us back into Eden, back into be
Mm.
with God in covenant. So I think it has a very biblical connection if you study the
That's great.
history.
The next question is regarding the Santa, famous mythical character. Mythical character. So the question goes like this: if Santa is a myth, then should we include him in the Christmas celebration? Whatever your answer is, why?
Well, I don't think we should lie and say that Santa's real to children. He
Mm,
obviously is just fake. But there is a real Saint Nicholas. I mean, he was based off a real saint from Turkey that lived about 1700 years ago or so. So what we told our daughter was that Santa Claus is the spirit of Christmas. He is just the spirit of gift giving, but he's not actually real. But you can celebrate Santa as long as you understand the truth behind him. So we shouldn't lie and say that Santa's real, but we also can still use Santa as
mm.
the spirit of Christmas. He's also called Father Christmas. So, he's the spirit of Christmas. And that's perfectly fine. I don't see any problem with that.
Okay. This question is regarding how to celebrate Christmas. Not just celebrate for the sake of celebrating, but how can we celebrate this Christmas biblically? What are your views and thoughts on it?
Well, if we're going to celebrate Christmas biblically, we need to remember one thing. Let's not get too much into presents, materialism.
Mm.
That should not be the focus. I think we have overblown the Christmas celebration and turned it into something much bigger than it needs to be, where all month we're running around trying to buy presents for people. We stopped doing that in my house. We now just buy one gift for one person. We don't buy a whole bunch of gifts for every single relative because it takes up too much time. It absorbs too much, takes the focus away from Christ and more on buying gifts. So that's what I would say to people. Let's not focus in on the gifts. Let's focus in on Christ. Let's try to reduce the materialism, reduce the aspect of greed. It's okay to give a few gifts, but that should not be the focus. Spend time with family, especially go to church to honor the incarnation. Remember the importance of the incarnation, why it's so important. If you want to see why it's so important, see a video on my YouTube channel called The Lost Message of the Bible. It's a 20-minute video that I give that explains why Christmas is so important and why the incarnation is so important, because there's things we miss
That's
about it.
great. What book would you recommend for us to read? This is not like in the sense of defense of Christmas or Christianity, but maybe a devotional kind of a book, if you have something in your mind.
Yeah, check out a great book I would say every Christian should read is The Prodigal God by Tim Keller. I think that's a really great place to start. Also, check out a book by C.S. Lewis called The Great Divorce. It's really short. And the reason why I think that's such an important book is because it's written from the perspective of souls in hell who get a trip up to heaven. But almost all of them reject it and go back to hell because they prefer it. So it's a very good explaining Christian grace, the nature of hell, why there are people in hell to begin with. And so I think it's a really great book every Christian should read.
Thank you so much. One of the books that I would recommend would be The Hidden Christmas by Tim Keller. It's also a great book if you all want to read it. Do you think there are any concerns of idolatry with regards to nativity scenes? Like some people start somehow worshiping it or keeping it the center of attraction?
I don't think that's a big worry. People set up nativity scenes as like a decoration for the holiday season. Now, if you saw somebody on their knees praying before a nativity scene, thinking that the idol or thinking that it was an idol, I think we need to explain the difference between an idol and a
Mm,
representation. Okay, because in the ancient Near East, these were different things. When God says don't make any idols, that doesn't mean don't make any representations. People get confused. An idol in the ancient world was not just a representation of a deity. It was thought that an essence of the deity would exist in the idol. So they would make the idol, and then it would go through certain rituals, like mouth watching rituals,
mm,
certain priestly rituals, and then an essence of the deity would come into
okay.
the idol. That is far different than just having a representation of Jesus, because you don't think an essence of
Mm,
Jesus comes into the idol. So just because someone has a nativity scene, that's not an idol because it didn't go through any rituals. You don't think it contains the essence of the deity. So I think nativity scenes are fine as long as we don't treat them with the idea that it somehow contains part of
okay,
Jesus.
that's great.
How does God speak to us? I struggle with how God speaks to his people. I mean, I always tell people God speaks to us through scripture. In the ancient world, he had prophets, but luckily the prophets delivered the messages. It was preserved in the Bible. And now that's how God speaks to us. He doesn't have to work through prophets because he's gotten the word to us now at this point. So God speaks to us to his word. And that's what you need to
Okay,
use. Someone said they were worried that they would go to hell for celebrating Christmas. And I
okay,
want to address this. So no one can go to hell for celebrating Christmas because sin does not send you to hell necessarily. Keyword necessarily. What sends you to hell is rejecting the Holy Spirit, rejecting God's free gift of grace. Okay. So then your sin will take you to hell. So if you just do something wrong as a Christian, you're forgiven. You don't go to hell after you've accepted the Holy Spirit, accepted the free gift of Christ. You're not going to go to hell for that, just maybe if you made a mistake. That's not how it works. So just keep that in mind. Yeah. And also, I do want to say this before we close out. I'm really happy to do this because there is some guy here in the U.S. who is spreading misinformation that Christmas is pagan, and he actually just did a hangout Zoom meeting about a week ago with like 30 Indian pastors in your country, telling them Christmas is pagan, telling them they should not be celebrating Christmas. And so if any of you encounter pastors in India telling you Christmas is pagan because this pastor in America named Jim Staley told you, send them to my YouTube channel, Inspiring Philosophy, because I have videos up there where I debunk this over and over again. There's no evidence Christmas is pagan. I just gave a sermon that I posted to my YouTube channel explaining why it's not sinful to partake of Christmas, why it's totally fine. So if you encounter anybody who's been deceived and thinks Christmas is pagan, be sure to send them to my channel. I'd be happy to address it and show them that Christmas is not pagan and it is not sinful.
That's great.